The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in Courtroom 4B of the San Diego Family Court, casting harsh shadows across the mahogany benches and worn carpet. 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat rigidly in the wooden chair, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white with tension. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore her best dress, a simple navy blue one that her grandmother had bought her for school picture day. But today wasn't about school pictures. Today was about something much more serious, something that would determine where she would live for the rest of her childhood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Judge Patricia Hawthorne peered over her reading glasses at the young girl, her expression a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed impatience. At 62, Judge Hawthorne had seen it all during her 25 years on the family court bench. Bitter custody battles, lying parents, coaching children to say what adults wanted to hear. She'd developed a sixth sense for deception, or so she believed. Her graying hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her black robe seemed to swallow her thin frame as she leaned forward in her high-backed chair. "Miss Rodriguez," Judge Hawthorne began, her voice carrying the authority of decades in the courtroom, "you've told this court some rather extraordinary stories about your mother, stories that, frankly, strain credibility." She paused, shuffling through the papers before her. "You claim your mother is a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite military units in the world. You say she's been deployed overseas on classified missions, which is why she hasn't been present for these proceedings." Emma's lawyer, Sarah Chen, a young public defender fresh out of law school, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had tried to advise Emma to tone down her claims about her mother, worried that the girl's elaborate stories would hurt her case. But Emma had been insistent, her young voice filled with conviction every time she spoke about Commander Maria Rodriguez and her service to their country. The opposing counsel, representing Emma's estranged father, Miguel Rodriguez, smirked from across the courtroom. Richard Blackwood was a seasoned family law attorney with silver hair and expensive suits, the kind of lawyer who specialized in convincing judges that his clients were the victims of elaborate schemes. He'd been systematically dismantling Emma's credibility for weeks, painting her as a troubled child with an overactive imagination, coached by a mother who'd rather play soldier than face her responsibilities as a parent. But her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore her best dress, a simple navy blue one that her grandmother had bought her for school picture day. But today wasn't about school pictures. Today was about something much more serious, something that would determine where she would live for the rest of her childhood. "Your Honor," Blackwood interjected, rising smoothly from his chair, "my client has been patient with these fantasies, but enough is enough. There is no record of any Maria Rodriguez serving in the Navy SEALs. In fact, women weren't even allowed in combat roles until recently, and certainly not in the SEALs program. This child has been fed a steady diet of lies by a mother who abandoned her responsibilities and fled to avoid facing the consequences of her actions." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She'd learned from her mother that tears were a luxury that warriors couldn't afford when the battle was far from over. "She's not lying," Emma said, her voice cracking with emotion. "My mom is the bravest person in the world. She saved people's lives. She got medals." Judge Hawthorne raised her hand for silence, her patience wearing thin. "Miss Rodriguez, I understand that you love your mother, and perhaps she's told you these stories to make herself seem more important in your eyes. But this court deals in facts, not fantasies. The fact is, your mother has been absent from these proceedings for 3 months. She has failed to respond to court summons, failed to provide any documentation of her alleged military service, and failed to demonstrate even the most basic level of responsibility toward you." The judge's words hit Emma like physical blows. She thought about the last time she'd seen her mother, 6 months ago, when Commander Rodriguez had knelt down in their small apartment, her sea bag packed and ready by the door. Her mother's hands, calloused from years of training and operations, had been gentle as they cupped Emma's face. "I have to go away again, mija," her mother had said, using the Spanish endearment that always made Emma feel safe. "This mission, it's important. People's lives depend on it. But I promise you, no matter what happens, no matter what anyone tells you, I will come back for you. Do you understand me? I will always come back for you." Emma had nodded then, not understanding the full weight of what her mother was saying. Now, sitting in this cold courtroom with adults who didn't believe a word she said, those promises felt like distant echoes of a dream she might have imagined. "Furthermore," Judge Hawthorne continued, her voice growing more stern, "your father has provided evidence of your mother's erratic behavior, her long unexplained absences, and her complete failure to maintain stable employment. Mr. Rodriguez, on the other hand, has a steady job, a stable home, and has expressed genuine concern for your welfare." Miguel Rodriguez straightened in his chair, adopting the posture of a wronged but forgiving father. He was a construction foreman, a man who worked with his hands and had never understood why his ex-wife, Maria, had always been so secretive about her work. Their marriage had fallen apart years ago, partly due to her frequent absences and the stress of her refusing to talk about her work. He'd convinced himself over time that she was probably having affairs, using her supposed military service as a cover for infidelity. "Your Honor," Miguel said when prompted by his lawyer, "I just want what's best for Emma. Her mother has filled her head with these wild stories, and now the girl doesn't know what's real and what's make-believe. She needs stability, routine, a normal life with a parent who will actually be there for her." Emma felt the walls of the courtroom closing in around her. Every adult in the room seemed to convinced that her mother was a liar, a deadbeat, a woman who abandoned her daughter to chase fantasies. But Emma knew better. She remembered the scars on her mother's body, the ones she'd claimed came from training accidents. She remembered the phone calls her mother would take in hushed tones, speaking in military jargon that Emma didn't understand but recognized as important. She remembered the way her mother moved, with a precision and awareness that seemed almost supernatural, like she was always ready for danger. Most of all, she remembered the night terrors, the times when her mother would wake up screaming, her body drenched in sweat, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats that existed only in her memories. Emma had learned to approach carefully during these episodes, to speak softly and remind her mother that she was safe, that they were home. "My mom has nightmares, bad ones. She wakes up screaming sometimes, and she checks all the locks 3 times before she goes to sleep. She taught me how to hide if any bad people ever came to our house, and she made me memorize phone numbers for people who could help me if something happened to her." Judge Hawthorne frowned, making a note on her legal pad. "Miss Rodriguez, those behaviors could indicate any number of issues, including mental illness or substance abuse problems. They certainly don't support your claims about military service." "She doesn't drink," she protested, "and she's not crazy. She's seen things, done things. She told me that sometimes people who serve their country have to carry heavy burdens, and that's why we have to be strong for them." Blackwood laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the courtroom walls. "Your Honor, we're listening to the elaborate fantasies of a child who's been coached by an unstable mother. My client has been more than patient, but it's time to face reality. Maria Rodriguez is not a Navy SEAL. She's not even in the military. She's a woman who abandoned her daughter and is now hiding from her responsibilities." Judge Hawthorne nodded slowly, her decision already forming in her mind. She'd seen too many cases like this. Absent parents who built elaborate lies to justify their irresponsibility, children who became casualties in adult games of deception and avoidance. Emma seemed like a sweet girl, but she was clearly living in a fantasy world created by a mother who cared more about her own delusions than her daughter's well-being. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the courtroom, casting long rectangles of golden light across the floor. Emma watched dust motes dance in the sunbeams, trying to distract herself from the weight of the judge's scrutiny. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, her father, his lawyer, her own attorney, the court reporter, even the bailiff standing by the door. all of them looking at her with expressions that ranged from pity to skepticism to barely concealed impatience. Judge Hawthorne was reviewing her notes, occasionally glancing up at Emma with the kind of look adults gave children who'd been caught in an elaborate lie. The silence stretched on, broken only by the soft scratching of the judge's pen and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. "Miss Rodriguez," the judge finally said, setting down her pen and folding her hands on the bench, "I want you to understand that this court's primary concern is your welfare. Everything we do here today is about ensuring that you have the best possible chance for a stable, healthy future." Emma's heart began to race. She could sense what was coming, could feel the shift in the room's atmosphere like the pressure change before a storm. She thought about her mother's training stories, how Commander Rodriguez had taught her that sometimes you had to endure difficult situations with grace and dignity, even when everything inside you was screaming to fight. Based on the evidence presented to this court, Judge Hawthorne continued, her voice taking on the formal tone she reserved for rendering decisions, "I find that the respondent, Maria Rodriguez, has demonstrated a pattern of abandonment and neglect. Her failure to appear in these proceedings, despite being served with proper notice, speaks to a fundamental lack of regard for both this court and, more importantly, her daughter's well-being." Sarah Chen, Emma's lawyer, started to rise from her chair to object, but Judge Hawthorne held up a hand to stop her. Furthermore, the judge continued, the respondent's history of erratic behavior, unexplained absences, and what appears to be the systematic deception of their minor child regarding her employment and activities raises serious questions about her fitness as a parent. This court cannot and will not enable the continued emotional manipulation of a child through elaborate fantasies. Emma felt like she was drowning. The words washed over her in waves, each one pushing her further underwater. She wanted to scream, to tell them all that they were wrong, that they didn't understand, but she could almost hear her mother's voice in her ear reminding her of the lessons about discipline and self-control that had been drilled into her since she was old enough to understand. The court finds that it is in the best interest of the minor child, Emma Rodriguez, to be placed in the full custody of her father, Miguel Rodriguez, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in Emma's chest like a gunshot. She stared at Judge Hawthorne in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Around her, she could hear her father and his lawyer discussing logistics, when she would be moved, what belongings she could take, how the transition would be handled. Their voices seemed to come from very far away. Miguel Rodriguez approached Emma's chair, his face arranged in what he probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "It's going to be okay, Emma," he said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "You're going to come live with me and Carla. We'll get you enrolled in a good school, help you make new friends. You'll see, this is the best thing for everyone." Emma pulled away from his touch, her body rigid with suppressed emotion. Carla was her father's girlfriend, a woman Emma had met exactly twice, both times for awkward dinners where Carla had tried too hard to bond with her. The idea of living with strangers, of being cut off from everything that connected her to her mother, felt like a death sentence. "When is my mom coming back?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miguel's expression tightened slightly. "Emma, we've talked about this. Your mom, she not coming back. She made her choice when she decided her fantasies were more important than you." "They're not fantasies." The words exploded out of Emma before she could stop them. "She's a Navy SEAL. She saves people. She's probably saving people right now while you're all sitting here lying about her." Judge Hawthorne looked up from her paperwork with obvious irritation. "Miss Rodriguez, this outburst only confirms my decision. You need to be in an environment where reality is acknowledged, not where these delusions are encouraged. Your father and his family will help you understand the difference between truth and fiction." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know anything about truth," she said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt.
My mom told me the truth. She told me there would be people who wouldn't understand, people who would try to make me doubt her because they can't handle the fact that some people are brave enough to serve their country. The bailiff took a step forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his radio, but Judge Hawthorne waved him back. Miss Rodriguez, sit down. Your behavior is not helping your case. What case? She shot back. You already decided. You decided my mom is a liar without even listening to me. You decided I'm just a stupid kid who doesn't know anything. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. My mom always told me that sometimes the hardest battles are fought by people who can't talk about them, people who sacrifice everything to keep other people safe, and nobody ever thanks them for it. Sarah Chen finally managed to get Emma to sit back down, whispering urgently in her ear about the importance of staying calm, but Emma could barely hear her over the roaring in her head. She felt like she was watching her whole world collapse from a great distance, powerless to stop the destruction. Judge Hawthorne made several more notes before looking up again. Mr. Rodriguez, you'll need to coordinate with Child Services to arrange for the immediate transfer of custody. Miss Rodriguez will have supervised visitation rights with her mother should the respondent ever choose to make herself available and undergo court-ordered psychological evaluation. What about my mom's things? What about our apartment? Miguel looked uncomfortable. We'll pack up what you need. Maybe some of your toys, your clothes. What about her medals, her uniform, her pictures with her team? Blackwood leaned over to whisper something in Miguel's ear, and her father's expression hardened. Emma, there are no medals. There is no uniform. There are no pictures with any team because your mother was never in the military. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can start healing from all the lies you've been told. Emma felt something break inside her chest, something that had been holding her together through this entire nightmare. She looked around the courtroom one more time, at the judge who'd condemned her mother without evidence, at the father who'd abandoned her for 3 years and now wanted to erase everything she believed in, at the lawyers who saw her nothing more than a case file to be closed. She's coming back, Emma said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears still streaming down her face. I don't care what any of you say. I don't care what any of you believe. My mom promised me she would come back, and she's never broken a promise to me, not once. She's coming back, and when she does, you're all going to see how wrong you were. Judge Hawthorne closed her file with a sharp snap. Miss Rodriguez, I hope for your sake that someday you'll be able to let go of these fantasies and build a relationship with reality. Court is adjourned. As the adults around her began to gather their papers and discuss next steps, Emma sat perfectly still in her chair. She closed her eyes and tried to remember everything her mother had taught her about mental toughness, about enduring hardship, about never giving up even when the odds seemed impossible. Somewhere out there, Commander Maria Rodriguez was fighting battles that Emma couldn't even imagine. And here, in this cold courtroom, Emma was fighting a battle of her own. She might have lost this round, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet.
The social worker's car smelled like vanilla air freshener and disappointment. Emma sat in the back seat, her small suitcase beside her containing everything the court had deemed essential for her new life. 3 changes of clothes, her toothbrush, a few books, and the worn photograph of her mother in military dress blues that she'd managed to slip from the frame while her father wasn't looking. Everything else, the life she'd built with her mother, the memories embedded in their shared spaces, the evidence of Commander Rodriguez's service that filled their apartment would be packed up by strangers and stored or disposed of as they saw fit. Mrs. Patterson, the social worker assigned to oversee Emma's transition, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with the kind of professional sympathy that Emma was already learning to hate. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, the type of adult who specialized in helping children process trauma and loss. But Emma didn't want to process anything. She wanted to hold on to every memory, every detail,
every piece of evidence that proved her mother was exactly who she claimed to be. "Emma, honey," Mrs. Patterson said as they pulled into the driveway of a modest two-story house in a suburban neighborhood, "I know this is difficult. Change always is, especially when it's not something we choose for ourselves. But your father really wants to make this work. He's been preparing for weeks to welcome you into his home." Emma stared at the house through the car window. It had a neat lawn, white picket fence, and flower boxes under the windows. The kind of place that looked like it belonged in a commercial for laundry detergent or breakfast cereal. Everything about it screamed normal, stable, ordinary. Everything her life with her mother had never been. Their apartment was different. It was small, practical, and always ready for quick departure. Her mother kept emergency bags packed, communication equipment that Emma wasn't allowed to touch, and maps marked with locations that she'd never explained. The furniture was minimal but functional, and there were no family photos on display. Maria had explained that operational security meant keeping personal information private, even at home. But Emma loved their apartment because it was theirs. She loved the way her mother would pace while talking on encrypted phone calls, the precision with which she maintained her equipment, the way she could appear completely relaxed while remaining perpetually alert to their surroundings. Living with Commander Rodriguez had been like living with a guardian angel who happened to be trained in 17 different ways to neutralize a threat. "I don't want to get out," Emma said quietly, her hands gripping the door handle but not moving to open it. Mrs. Patterson turned in her seat to face Emma directly. "I understand, but staying in the car isn't going to change what's happened. Your father is waiting inside, and the longer we delay this, the harder it's going to be for everyone." Through the front window of the house, Emma could see movement. Her father appeared, followed by a woman with blonde hair and a nervous smile. Carla, the girlfriend who was apparently going to play stepmother in this new version of Emma's life. They were both trying to look welcoming and excited, but Emma could see the tension in their postures, the uncertainty in their expressions. "What if my mom comes back and can't find me?" Emma asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her since the judge's ruling. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "Emma, honey, the court has your father's address on file. If your mother returns and wants to arrange visitation, she'll be able to find you through the proper legal channels. But honey, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she's coming back," Emma interrupted firmly. "I know everyone thinks I'm just a kid who doesn't understand anything, but I know my mom. She's never broken a promise to me, not once in my entire life. If she said she's coming back, then she's coming back." Mrs. Patterson didn't argue, but Emma could see the doubt in her eyes. It was the same look the judge had given her, the same expression her father's lawyer had worn throughout the proceedings. The look adults give kids who believed in fairy tales and Santa Claus and other things that couldn't possibly be real. The front door of the house opened, and Miguel Rodriguez walked down the driveway toward the car. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, dressed like he was going to a barbecue instead of receiving his daughter back after years of absence. His smile was too wide, too forced, the expression of a man who was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else that this was the right thing to do. "Come on, Emma," he said, opening her car door. "Let's get you settled in. Carla made your favorite cookies." Emma wanted to tell him that he had no idea what her favorite cookies were, that he'd missed 3 birthdays and 2 Christmases, and countless everyday moments that might have taught him such basic facts about his daughter. But she bit her tongue and climbed out of the car, clutching her suitcase like a shield. The house was exactly what Emma had expected. Beige walls, family photos of people she barely knew, the kind of generic home decor that came from department store catalogs. Everything about it screamed normal, stable, ordinary. Everything her life with her mother had never been. Their apartment was different. It was small, practical, and always ready for quick departure. Her mother kept emergency bags packed, communication equipment that Emma wasn't allowed to touch, and maps marked with locations that she'd never explained. The furniture was minimal but functional, and there were no family photos on display. Maria had explained that operational security meant keeping personal information private, even at home. But Emma loved their apartment. She loved the way her mother would pace while talking on encrypted phone calls, the precision with which she maintained her equipment, the way she could appear completely relaxed while remaining perpetually alert to their surroundings. Living with Commander Rodriguez had been like living with a guardian angel who happened to be trained in 17 different ways to neutralize a threat. "I don't want to get out," Emma said quietly, her hands gripping the door handle but not moving to open it. Mrs. Patterson turned in her seat to face Emma directly. "I understand, but staying in the car isn't going to change what's happened. Your father is waiting inside, and the longer we delay this, the harder it's going to be for everyone." Through the front window of the house, Emma could see movement. Her father appeared, followed by a woman with blonde hair and a nervous smile. Carla, the girlfriend, who was apparently going to play stepmother in this new version of Emma's life. They were both trying to look welcoming and excited, but Emma could see the tension in their postures, the uncertainty in their expressions. "What if my mom comes back and can't find me?" Emma asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her since the judge's ruling. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "Emma, honey, the court has your father's address on file. If your mother returns and wants to arrange visitation, she'll be able to find you through the proper legal channels. But honey, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she's coming back." Emma interrupted firmly. "I know everyone thinks I'm just a kid who doesn't understand anything, but I know my mom. She's never broken a promise to me, not once in my entire life. If she said she's coming back, then she's coming back." Mrs. Patterson didn't argue, but Emma could see the doubt in her eyes. It was the same look the judge had given her, the same expression her father's lawyer had worn throughout the proceedings. The look adults give kids who believed in fairy tales and Santa Claus and other things that couldn't possibly be real. The front door of the house opened, and Miguel Rodriguez walked down the driveway toward the car. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, dressed like he was going to a barbecue instead of receiving his daughter back after years of absence. His smile was too wide, too forced. The expression of a man who was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else that this was the right thing to do. "Come on, Emma," he said, opening her car door. "Let's get you settled in. Carla made your favorite cookies." Emma wanted to tell him that he had no idea what her favorite cookies were, that he'd missed 3 birthdays and 2 Christmases, and countless everyday moments that might have taught him such basic facts about his daughter, but she bit her tongue and climbed out of the car, clutching her suitcase like a shield. The house was exactly what Emma had expected. Beige walls, family photos of people she barely knew, the kind of generic home decor that came from department store catalogs. Everything about it screamed normal, stable, ordinary. Everything her life with her mother had never been. A room was at the back of the house, overlooking a small backyard with a swing set that looked like it had never been used. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and the bed was made up with a floral comforter that belonged to someone else's idea of what a 12-year-old girl should like. On the dresser, Carla had placed a small vase of flowers and a card that read, "Welcome home, Emma." "Do you like it?" Carla asked, wringing her hands as Emma set her suitcase on the bed without comment. Emma looked around the room, trying to imagine sleeping here, doing homework at the small white desk, hanging her clothes in the empty closet. It was perfectly nice, perfectly normal, and absolutely nothing like the space she'd shared with her mother. There were no maps on the walls, no communication equipment hidden in drawers, no sense that this room belonged to someone who lived a life of purpose and importance. "It's fine," Emma said, because she could tell that Carla needed some kind of response. Miguel appeared in the doorway, still wearing that uncomfortable smile. "We thought maybe tomorrow we could go shopping for some things for your room. New clothes, maybe some books, whatever you need." Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "My mom's coming back," she said matter-of-factly. "When she does, I'm going to live with her again."
The smile faded from Miguel's face, replaced by something that looked like frustration mixed with pity. "Emma, we've talked about this. Your mom, She's not coming back. She made her choice. You don't know her, Emma replied. You never knew her. If you did, you wouldn't have left us. The words hung in the air like an accusation, which they were. Miguel's face flushed slightly, and Emma could see him struggling with how to respond. Carla looked back and forth between them, clearly out of her depth in this family drama she'd inherited. That's different, Miguel said finally. Your mom and I, we had our problems, but that doesn't mean... She said you couldn't handle what she did for a living. She said you wanted her to be someone she wasn't, someone small and ordinary who would make you feel important. She said some people aren't built for extraordinary things. Miguel's jaw tightened. Your mother filled your head with stories because she couldn't face the truth about herself. She wasn't extraordinary, Emma. She was irresponsible and selfish, and she used these fantasy stories to justify abandoning the people who needed her. Emma stood up abruptly, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Stop talking about her like that. You don't know anything. You never knew anything. Emma, calm down, Carla said, stepping forward with her hands raised in what she probably thought was a soothing gesture. We're all family here. We need to learn to get along. You're not my family, Emma said quietly, her voice deadly calm. My family is out there serving her country, probably risking her life, while you sit here in your perfect little house pretending that this is what normal looks like. She walked past them both and out of the room, leaving her suitcase unpacked on the bed. Behind her, she could hear Miguel and Carla whispering urgently to each other, trying to figure out how to handle a 12-year-old who refused to be grateful for their charity. Emma found her way to the back porch and sat on the steps overlooking the empty swing set. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the colors her mother had described seeing from the deck of a Navy ship. Somewhere out there, Commander Maria Rodriguez was fighting battles that civilians couldn't imagine, carrying out missions that would never make the evening news, protecting people who would never know her name. And here, in this suburban prison disguised as a loving home, Emma was fighting her own battle, the battle to hold on to the truth in a world that had decided she was too young to know what truth looked like. She would wait. However long it took, however many people told her she was wrong, however many nights she had to sleep in the stranger's house, she would wait. Because her mother had made her a promise, and Commander Maria Rodriguez had never broken a promise in her life. The first star appeared in the darkening sky, and Emma made a wish that she'd been making every night for the past 6 months. Bring her home safe, and bring her home soon. She had no idea that 3,000 miles away, her mother was fighting for her life in a classified operation that would either vindicate everything Emma believed or ensure that she would never see her mother again.
3 weeks had passed since Emma had been forced to move in with her father and Carla, and the routine they'd established felt as foreign to her as living on another planet. Every morning, Carla would wake her up with artificial cheerfulness, offering breakfast options, as if choosing between pancakes and cereal could somehow fix the fundamental wrongness of Emma's new existence. Every afternoon, Miguel would ask about her day at the new school with the kind of forced interest that made Emma's skin crawl. And every evening, they'd sit around the dinner table, like actors in a play about what a happy family was supposed to look like. Emma had been enrolled at Westfield Elementary, a sprawling suburban school that seemed to specialize in producing children who fit neatly into predetermined categories. Her classmates were polite, but distant, sensing something different about the new girl who spoke little and smiled even less. Her teachers reported that she was academically capable, but seemed disconnected and unwilling to engage with the social aspects of classroom life. What they didn't understand was that Emma felt like she was living underwater, moving through each day in a haze of grief and stubborn hope that made everything feel muffled and distant. She went through the motions, completing assignments, eating meals, responding when spoken to, but her real life was suspended, waiting for her mother to return and restore order to the universe. The worst part was the way Miguel and Carla tried to replace her mother's memory with their version of normal family life. They took her shopping for clothes that looked like every other sixth grader's wardrobe, enrolled her in after-school activities designed to help her make friends and adjust, and filled her room with decorations that had nothing to do with who she actually was. "We thought you might like to try soccer," Carla suggested one Thursday evening, showing Emma a registration form for the local youth league. "It's great exercise, and you'll meet other kids your age." Emma looked up from her homework with the kind of polite indifference she'd perfected over the past few weeks. "My mom taught me Krav Maga," she said matter-of-factly. "She said soccer's fine for recreation, but if I was going to learn to defend myself, I should learn something useful." Miguel set down his coffee cup with more force than necessary. "Emma, we've talked about this. Your mother taught you some basic self-defense, maybe, but Krav Maga is a military combat system. Children don't learn Krav Maga." "Children of Navy SEALs do," Emma replied calmly, returning to her math worksheet. "She started teaching me when I was 8. Said I needed to be able to protect myself if something happened to her during a deployment." Carla and Miguel exchanged one of their looks, the kind of meaningful glance that adults shared when they thought a child was saying something particularly concerning. Emma had learned to recognize these looks, had become an expert in reading the subtle communications that passed between the two people who now controlled her life. "Emma," Carla said carefully, sitting down at the kitchen table across from her, "have you ever considered talking to someone about your mom? A counselor, maybe. Someone who specializes in helping kids process difficult situations." Emma's pencil stopped moving across the paper. She looked up at Carla with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than 12. "You mean someone who would try to convince me that my mother is crazy and I should be grateful to be living with you?" "That's not what I meant," Carla said quickly, though her flushed cheeks suggested that Emma had hit closer to the truth than she'd intended. "I meant someone who could help you work through your feelings about everything that's happened." "I don't need to work through anything," Emma said, her voice steady and certain. "I need everyone to stop trying to convince me that my mother is someone she isn't. I need people to stop acting like wanting to live with the parent who actually raised me is some kind of mental illness." Miguel leant forward, his expression a mixture of frustration and what he probably thought was paternal concern. "Emma, you're 12 years old. You don't understand the complexity of adult relationships or the reasons why your mother made the choices she made. Sometimes adults have to make decisions that seem cruel to protect the people they love." Emma set down her pencil and looked at her father with an expression that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. "You mean like how my mom makes decisions that seem cruel to protect her country? Like how she sacrifices time with her family to keep other families safe? Those kinds of difficult adult decisions?" The silence that followed was only broken by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic from the street outside. Emma could see Miguel struggling how to respond, could see the way his jaw clenched as he tried to control his temper. "Your mother abandoned you, Emma. She chose whatever fantasy life she was living over being a parent to you. That's not heroism, that's selfishness." Emma stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. "She didn't abandon me. She's serving her country. She's probably in some terrible, dangerous place right now, risking her life so people like you can sit in your safe little house and judge her." "Emma, please," Carla began, but Emma was already walking toward the stairs.
My mom told me this would happen, she said, turning back to face them both. She said there would be people who couldn't understand what she did, people who would try to make me doubt her because they needed to believe that their ordinary lives were somehow better than her extraordinary one. She said the price of freedom is that most people never have to see what it costs. She was halfway up the stairs when Miguel called after her. Emma, come back here. We're not finished talking about this. Emma paused on the landing, her hand gripping the banister. Yes, we are. We're finished talking about this because you don't want to have a conversation. You want to convince me that everything I know about my own mother is wrong, and I'm not going to let that happen. In her room, Emma closed the door and sat on the bed, pulling out the photograph of her mother that she kept hidden between the pages of her history textbook. Commander Maria Rodriguez looked back at her from the picture, resplendent in her dress blues, her shoulders squared and her expression confident. Emma had taken the photo herself at a Navy ceremony 2 years ago, one of the few public events her mother had been able to attend. Emma remembered that date clearly, how proud she'd been to see her mother receiving recognition for her service, how other officers had approached them afterwards to express their respect for Commander Rodriguez's contributions to their missions. She remembered the weight of the medals her mother had shown her privately, the stories behind the commendations that could never be shared publicly due to their classified nature. But most of all, she remembered the promise her mother had made that night as they'd driven home through the darkened streets of San Diego. No matter what happens, mija, no matter how long I'm gone or what people try to tell you about me, you remember this. Everything I do, every mission I accept, every risk I take, it's all so that you can grow up in a world where you're safe and free. You are the reason I fight. You are the reason I come home. Emma pressed the photograph to her chest and closed her eyes, trying to summon the sense of security that she'd always felt in her mother's presence. Somewhere out there, Commander Maria Rodriguez was fighting battles that would never make the news, carrying out operations that would remain classified for decades, serving a country that would never thank her for her sacrifices. And here, in this suburban house that smelled like vanilla candles and broken dreams, Emma was fighting her own war, the battle to preserve the truth about her mother against a world that had decided the truth was too extraordinary to be believed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
As the weeks turned into months, Emma's situation at her new school began to attract attention from people beyond her immediate family. Her teachers noticed that she excelled academically but remained socially isolated, preferring to spend her lunch periods in the library reading military history and biographies of famous female service members. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, no relation, despite the shared surname, became increasingly concerned about what she saw as Emma's unhealthy fixation on military themes. It was Mrs. Rodriguez who first contacted Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist who specialized in cases involving parental abandonment and childhood trauma. Dr. Walsh was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had helped countless children work through difficult transitions. She'd seen cases like Emma's before, children whose absent parents had created elaborate fantasy narratives to explain their disappearances, leaving their kids clinging to impossible stories rather than facing painful realities. She's clearly a bright child, Mrs. Rodriguez explained during their phone consultation, but she's completely fixated on this idea that her mother is some kind of military hero. She writes essays about female combat veterans, checks out books about Navy SEALs, and becomes visibly agitated whenever anyone suggests that her mother might not be who she claims to be. Dr. Walsh agreed to meet with Emma, though she suspected the case would follow a familiar pattern. In her experience, children created elaborate mythologies around absent parents as a way of protecting themselves from feelings of abandonment and rejection. The more extraordinary the story, the more pain the child was usually trying to avoid processing.
Their first session took place on a gray Thursday afternoon in Dr. Walsh's office, a carefully designed space filled with comfortable furniture, calming colors, and strategically placed books and games designed to put young clients at ease. Emma sat rigidly in the chair across from Dr. Walsh's desk, her posture eerily reminiscent of military bearing despite her young age. "Emma," Dr. Walsh began, her voice warm and non-threatening, "I understand you've been through some big changes lately. Moving to a new home, starting at a new school. Those are challenging transitions for anyone, especially someone your age." Emma nodded politely but said nothing, her dark eyes studying Dr. Walsh with an intensity that was slightly unsettling. There was something about the girl's gaze that reminded Dr. Walsh of combat veterans she'd worked with, a quality of alertness that seemed inappropriate for a 12-year-old. "Your teachers tell me you're doing well academically, but they're concerned that you seem to be having trouble connecting with your classmates. Sometimes when we're dealing with difficult emotions, it can be hard to open up to new people. I'm not having trouble with difficult emotions. I'm having trouble with people who think they know more about my life than I do." Dr. Walsh made a note on her legal pad. "Tell me about your mother, Emma. I understand she's been an important part of your life." Emma's posture straightened even further, if that was possible. "My mother is Commander Maria Rodriguez, United States Navy. She's a member of SEAL Team 6, and she's currently deployed on a classified mission that she can't discuss with civilians." "I see," Dr. Walsh said carefully. "That must make you very proud." "It does," Emma replied, and for the first time since entering the office, her expression softened slightly. "She saved a lot of people's lives. She's been to places most people have never heard of, doing things that most people couldn't imagine. She's the bravest person I know." Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. "Emma, what do you know about the Navy SEALs? About what kind of training they go through?" Emma's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm most children reserve for discussing their favorite video games or pop stars. SEAL stands for Sea, Air, and Land. They're special operations forces trained in unconventional warfare, direct action, and special reconnaissance. The training program has a washout rate of about 75%, and it includes Hell Week, which is 5.5 days of continuous physical and mental stress designed to identify candidates who have the psychological resilience necessary for special operations. Dr. Walsh blinked in surprise. Emma's knowledge was far too detailed and accurate for a child who was simply making up stories about her mother. "That's very impressive knowledge, Emma. Where did you learn all of that?" "From my mom," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "She used to tell me stories about her training, about the missions she could discuss, about the importance of mental toughness and never giving up when things get difficult." "Emma," Dr. Walsh said gently, "you know that women aren't allowed to serve in the Navy SEALs, right? The program has never accepted female candidates." Emma's expression didn't change. "That's what everyone says, but my mom explained that some things that happen in the military aren't discussed publicly. She said there are programs and operations that exist outside of what gets reported in the news or what gets acknowledged in official documents." Dr. Walsh made another note. This was a more sophisticated delusion than she had expected. Emma wasn't just claiming her mother was a SEAL. She was constructing elaborate explanations for why there would be no public record of her service. It suggested a level of psychological investment in the fantasy that might be more difficult to address than typical cases. "Can you tell me about the last time you saw your mother?" Dr. Walsh asked. Emma's expression grew distant, as if she was looking back through time. 6 months ago. She had to leave for a mission. She couldn't tell me where she was going or how long she'd be gone, but she promised she would come back for me. She said no matter what happened, no matter what anyone tried to tell me, I should remember that she loved me and that everything she did was to keep me safe. "That must have been very difficult," Dr. Walsh said. 6 months is a long time for a child to be separated from a parent. "Not as difficult as what she's probably going through," Emma replied. "She told me that sometimes the people who protect others have to carry burdens that most people couldn't handle. She said part of being strong is being able to wait for the people we love, even when we don't know when they're coming home." Dr. Walsh spent the remainder of the session trying different approaches to help Emma examine her beliefs about her mother, but the girl's conviction never wavered. She answered every question with the kind of detailed consistency that spoke to either an elaborate coaching job or genuine belief in what she was saying. After Emma left, Dr. Walsh sat in her office reviewing her notes and feeling more unsettled than she cared to admit. In her experience, children who created fantasy narratives about absent parents usually had obvious gaps in their stories, contradictions that revealed the fictional nature of their claims. But Emma's account was remarkably consistent and detailed, almost as if Dr. Walsh shook her head, dismissing the thought before it could fully form. She'd been working with traumatized children for 15 years. She knew the difference between truth and fantasy, between healthy coping mechanisms and dangerous delusions. Emma Rodriguez was a bright child who had created an elaborate mythology to protect herself from the pain of maternal abandonment. Her job was to help Emma face reality, not to enable her fantasies. But that night, as Dr. Walsh drove home through the San Diego evening, she found herself thinking about Emma's knowledge of military procedures, the girl's unusual bearing, the way she spoke about classified operations with the casual familiarity of someone who had grown up around such things. She found herself, despite her professional training and years of experience, wondering whether there might be more to Emma's story than she had initially assumed.
Dr. Walsh's doubts about Emma's case began to crystallize during their third session together. She'd spent the week between appointments researching Navy SEAL training procedures, operational security protocols, and the military's policies regarding women in combat roles. What she'd discovered had shaken some of her fundamental assumptions about the case. Emma's knowledge of military procedures wasn't just accurate, it was current, detailed, and included information that wasn't readily available to civilian researchers. When Dr. Walsh had tested her during their second session by asking about specific aspects of SEAL training that she'd researched online, Emma had corrected several inaccuracies in the publicly available information with the confidence of someone who had access to better sources. Moreover, Emma's behavioral patterns were consistent with children who had grown up in military families, particularly those with parents in special operations. She displayed what psychologists called operational security awareness, an ingrained tendency to be cautious about sharing personal information, an ability to remain calm under questioning, and a level of emotional discipline that was unusual for her age. "Emma," Dr. Walsh began during their third session, "I've been thinking about our conversations, and I have to admit, I'm curious about something. Your knowledge of military procedures is remarkably detailed. Have you spent time around other military families?" Emma studied Dr. Walsh's face carefully before answering. "My mom said I should be careful about what I tell people about our life. She said operational security doesn't just apply to her, it applies to me too, because the families of special operations personnel can be targets." Dr. Walsh felt a chill run down her spine. "Targets for what, Emma?" "Retaliation," Emma replied, matter-of-factly. "If my mom participated in operations against hostile forces, those forces might try to hurt her by going after me. She said that's why we moved apartments every few years, why she kept her work life separate from her home life, why she couldn't have normal relationships with civilian men who didn't understand operational security." The mention of Emma's father struck Dr. Walsh as particularly significant. "Is that why your parents' marriage ended? Because of your mother's work?" Emma's expression grew sad. "My dad wanted her to quit. He said he didn't understand why she had to be gone so much, why she couldn't talk about her job, why she always seemed like she was ready for trouble, even when they were just going to the grocery store. He said he felt like he was married to a stranger." "That must have been painful for all of you," Dr. Walsh said gently. "My mom said it was the hardest decision she ever had to make. She said she loved my dad, but she couldn't give up her mission to make him comfortable. She said sometimes you have to choose between what's easy and what's right.
and she'd rather have me grow up with a mother who served something bigger than herself than a mother who gave up her purpose to make other people happy. Dr. Walsh made extensive notes as Emma spoke. The girl's account was becoming more compelling with each session, not less. The details were too specific, too emotionally consistent, and too psychologically sophisticated for a 12-year-old to have fabricated. "Emma," Dr. Walsh said carefully, "do you have any proof of your mother's service? Photographs, documents, anything that might help people understand what you've been telling them?" Emma's face lit up. "I have pictures, but they're back at our apartment. My dad packed everything up, but he said most of it was just junk and fantasy props. He threw away a lot of stuff, but I think some of it might be in storage." Dr. Walsh felt her pulse quicken. What kind of pictures? Pictures of my mom with her team, pictures from ceremonies, pictures of her in different uniforms. She couldn't keep most of them at the apartment because of security rules, but she had some that were okay for me to see. And she had a medal, a silver star, that she kept in a safe deposit box, but she showed it to me once on my birthday. Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, processing what Emma had told her. A silver star was one of the military's highest decorations for valor, not the kind of thing that would be given out lightly or faked easily. If Emma was telling the truth about seeing such a medal— "Emma," Dr. Walsh said slowly, "would you be willing to ask your father about accessing those storage items, just to look through them together?" Emma's expression grew doubtful. "He won't want to. He gets angry every time I mention anything about my mom's military service. He says it's all fantasy and I need to accept reality." Dr. Walsh made a decision that went against her typical professional protocol. What if I spoke to him? What if I explained that sometimes, in order to help children move forward, we need to address their concerns directly rather than dismissing them? Emma looked at Dr. Walsh with surprise and something that might have been hope. "You believe me?" Dr. Walsh chose her words carefully. "I believe that you believe what you're telling me, and I believe that you deserve to have your concerns taken seriously, even if the adults in your life think they know what's best for you. Sometimes the best way to help someone face reality is to examine the evidence together." For the first time that Dr. Walsh had met her, Emma's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back with the discipline of someone who had been taught that crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. "No one has listened to me," Emma said quietly. "Not the judge, not my dad, not my teachers. Everyone just decided I was making it all up because they think a kid can't handle the truth about what her mom really does." Dr. Walsh leaned forward in her chair. "Emma, I want you to know that I'm going to speak with your father. I can't promise that we'll find what you're looking for, but I can promise that your voice will be heard. Sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes we need to be willing to admit when we might be wrong." As Emma left that afternoon, Dr. Walsh sat in her office staring at her notes and feeling like she was standing at the edge of a precipice. Everything in her professional training told her that she was enabling a child's delusions, that she should be working to help Emma accept the painful reality of her mother's abandonment. But everything in her gut told her that Emma Rodriguez was telling the truth and that the adults in her life had failed her in the most fundamental way possible, by refusing to believe her when she needed them most. That evening, Dr. Walsh made 2 phone calls. The first was to Miguel Rodriguez, requesting a meeting to discuss Emma's treatment. The second was to a colleague who had connections in the military psychology community, someone who might be able to help her verify whether Emma's claims about her mother could possibly be true. Because if they were true, then Emma Rodriguez wasn't a traumatized child clinging to fantasies. She was a military dependent whose mother was serving her country in the most dangerous and classified ways possible, and who had been failed by a system that couldn't recognize the truth when a 12-year-old girl was brave enough to speak it.
Dr. Walsh's meeting with Miguel Rodriguez took place on a Tuesday evening at his house, with Carla present as a show of united parental authority. The atmosphere in the living room was tense from the moment Dr. Walsh walked through the front door. Miguel had clearly been prepared for this conversation by his lawyer, and his defensive posture suggested he viewed Dr. Walsh as another obstacle to overcome, rather than a professional trying to help his daughter. Dr. Walsh, Miguel began before she'd even had a chance to sit down. I appreciate your concern for Emma, but I think it's important that you understand the situation we're dealing with here. My daughter has been subjected to years of psychological manipulation by a woman who filled her head with elaborate fantasies rather than taking responsibility for her role as a mother. Dr. Walsh settled into the offered chair and opened her notepad, her expression professionally neutral despite her growing conviction that Miguel Rodriguez was catastrophically wrong about his ex-wife and daughter. Mr. Rodriguez, I understand your concerns, but I have to tell you, after several sessions with Emma, I'm finding her accounts remarkably consistent and detailed. Her knowledge of military procedures and special operations protocols is far beyond what a child could simply invent. Carla shifted uncomfortably on the couch beside Miguel. But Dr. Walsh, anyone can look up military information on the internet these days. Emma's always been a bright child. She could have researched these things to make her mother's stories seem more believable. That's what I thought initially, Dr. Walsh replied. But Emma's knowledge includes information that isn't available through public sources. She knows current operational procedures, security protocols, and classification levels that wouldn't be accessible to civilian researchers. Moreover, her behavioral patterns are consistent with children who have grown up in military families, particularly those with parents in special operations. Miguel's face flushed with anger. Are you seriously suggesting that you believe these ridiculous stories? Dr. Walsh, women aren't even allowed in the Navy SEALs. It's physically impossible for Maria to be what Emma claims she is. Dr. Walsh had been expecting this argument and had prepared for it carefully. Mr. Rodriguez, that's what I thought too. But I've done extensive research since I began working with Emma, and I've discovered that the military's policies regarding women in special operations have been evolving rapidly and largely outside of public view. There are classified programs, pilot studies, and special assignments that don't follow the same rules as conventional military service. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and set it on the coffee table. I spoke with a colleague who has connections in military psychology, someone who works with special operations personnel. He confirmed that there are indeed women serving in roles that aren't officially acknowledged, and that the families of these service members often face exactly the kind of disbelief and isolation that Emma has experienced. Miguel stared at the folder as if it contained a bomb. That's impossible. Maria was never in the military at all. I was married to her for 5 years. I would have known. Would you? Dr. Walsh asked gently. Mr. Rodriguez, what did you actually know about your ex-wife's work? What did she tell you about her job, her schedule, her responsibilities? Miguel's jaw clenched as he struggled to answer. She said she worked for the government, defense contracting or something like that, but she was always vague about the details, always claimed she couldn't discuss her work because of security clearances. And that didn't strike you as consistent with classified military work? It struck me as suspicious, Miguel exploded. It struck me as the kind of thing someone says when they're hiding something, when they're living a double life. Dr. Walsh made a note on her pad. Mr. Rodriguez, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. During your marriage, did your wife ever display behavior that might be consistent with military training? Hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping, specific physical fitness routines, unusual knowledge of weapons or tactics? Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing troubled. She was always very aware of her surroundings. She'd check locks multiple times, position herself so she could see exits when we went to restaurants. She had nightmares, sometimes bad ones, where she'd wake up fighting, and she was incredibly strong, stronger than any woman I had ever met. Did she ever explain these behaviors? She said she'd had some bad experiences when she was younger, that she'd learned to be careful, but she never gave me details. She never told me anything specific about her past. Dr. Walsh leaned forward. Mr. Rodriguez, I'd like to ask you to consider something. What if your wife wasn't lying to you? What if she was protecting you by not sharing details about work that was genuinely dangerous and classified? What if the vagueness and secrecy weren't signs of deception, but signs of operational security? Miguel stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. No, I can't accept that. If that were true, it would mean I left my family because I couldn't handle my wife being a hero. It would mean I abandoned my daughter because I was too small-minded to understand what her mother was sacrificing for our country. Mr. Rodriguez, Dr. Walsh said quietly, sometimes the hardest truth to face is the one that forces us to re-examine our own actions. Carla reached for Miguel's hand as he stood by the window, her face pale. Miguel, what if she's right? What if we've been wrong about all of this? Miguel turned to face both women, his expression a mixture of anguish and denial. Even if that were possible, it doesn't change anything. Maria still left Emma. She still chose her career over her daughter. She still allowed our child to be placed in foster care rather than coming home to fight for custody. Dr. Walsh consulted her notes. Mr. Rodriguez, according to Emma, her mother was deployed on a classified mission when the custody proceedings began. If that's true, Commander Rodriguez might not have had a choice about her absence. Special operations personnel don't get to leave missions early for personal reasons, no matter how important those reasons might be. Commander Rodriguez? Miguel's voice was barely a whisper. That's the rank Emma has consistently given for her mother. And before you ask, a Navy commander is an O5 level officer, the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel in other branches. It's not a rank that someone would accidentally choose if they were making up a story. Miguel sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. This is impossible. If any of this were true, there would be records, documentation, something official that would prove Maria's service. Dr. Walsh closed her folder and looked at both Miguel and Carla with an expression that was both compassionate and determined. Mr. Rodriguez, Emma tells me that her mother had personal items, photographs, and documents stored separately from her work materials. She mentioned that these items might be in the storage unit where you placed her belongings after the apartment was cleared out. Miguel looked up slowly. You want me to go through Maria's things? I want you to give Emma the chance to show you evidence that might support what she's been trying to tell everyone. I want you to consider the possibility that your daughter isn't living in a fantasy world, but that she's been telling the truth about something that the adults in her life couldn't accept because it was too extraordinary to believe. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock on the mantelpiece. Miguel stared at his hands while Carla watched him with growing concern. Finally, he looked up at Dr. Walsh with eyes that held more pain than she'd seen in all their previous interactions. What if you're wrong? He asked quietly. What if we go through all of this and it turns out that Emma really has been living in a fantasy? What if opening these boxes just reinforces her delusions and makes it harder for her to accept reality? Dr. Walsh met her gaze steadily. Then we will deal with that outcome together with professional support and a clear treatment plan. But, Mr. Rodriguez, what if I'm right? What if Emma has been telling the truth and we failed her by refusing to believe her? What if her mother really is serving our country in ways we can't publicly acknowledge and her daughter has been punished for being proud of that service? Miguel was quiet for another long moment before nodding slowly. Okay, he said finally, okay, we'll look at what's in storage. But I want you there, Dr. Walsh. I want a professional witness to whatever we find. Dr. Walsh smiled for the first time since entering the house. Of course. And Mr. Rodriguez, whatever we discover, I want you to know that taking this step, being willing to question your assumptions for Emma's sake, that takes courage. As Dr. Walsh gathered her things and prepared to leave, none of them had any idea that 3,000 miles away, a classified operation was reaching its conclusion, and that Commander Maria Rodriguez was finally free to come home to the daughter who had never stopped believing in her.
The Morrison storage facility sat on the outskirts of San Diego like a concrete monument to all the things people couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't stand to keep close. Miguel Rodriguez stood in front of Unit 247 with the key trembling slightly in his hand. Emma beside him, radiating a mixture of hope and terror that was almost palpable. Dr. Walsh stood a few steps back, her professional demeanor masking her own nervousness about what they might discover.
It had taken 3 days to arrange this meeting. 3 days during which Emma had barely slept, spending her nights staring at the ceiling and wondering if this would be the moment when the adults in her life finally understood what she'd been trying to tell them. 3 days, during which Miguel had swung between determination to prove his daughter wrong and a growing dread that she might be right. "Emma," Miguel said, turning to face his daughter, "before we do this, I want you to understand something. Whatever we find in here, whatever happens today, it doesn't change the fact that your mother left you. It doesn't change the fact that I'm your father and that I love you and that I want what's best for you." Emma looked at her father with eyes that seemed too old for her 12-year-old face. "I understand, Dad, but I need you to understand something too. If we find proof that my mom is who I said she is, it doesn't change the fact that you didn't believe me. It doesn't change the fact that you made me feel like I was crazy for loving her." The words hung in the air between them like an accusation and a plea rolled into one. Miguel's face flushed, but before he could respond, Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "Let's focus on what we're here to do," she said gently. "Whatever we discover today, we'll process together. Emma, are you ready?" Emma nodded, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. Miguel inserted the key and rolled up the metal door with a screech that echoed off the concrete walls of the storage facility. The unit was packed with boxes, furniture, and the detritus of a life interrupted. Carla and Miguel had clearly thrown everything together quickly, more concerned with clearing out the apartment than with organizing Maria Rodriguez's belongings for any kind of systematic review. Cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly, labeled only with brief descriptions in Carla's neat handwriting. Kitchen items, books, Emma's room, clothes. Emma moved immediately toward a set of boxes in the back corner, her movements sure and purposeful. Her personal things would be back there, she said, pointing to a stack of unlabeled boxes. She kept them separate from everything else. Miguel and Dr. Walsh followed Emma deeper into the unit, stepping carefully around furniture and stacked boxes. The air smelled like dust and old cardboard, with an underlying scent that might have been military surplus equipment, canvas and leather, and something vaguely metallic. Emma reached the boxes she'd been seeking and stopped, her hand resting on top of the stack. "This one," she said quietly. "This box has her pictures." Miguel moved to help her lift the heavy box down, and they carried it to a clear space near the front of the unit where the light was better. Emma's hands were shaking as she used her fingernails to pry open the tape that sealed the cardboard flaps. Inside the box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper and bubble wrap, were photograph albums, loose pictures, and official-looking documents in protective sleeves. Emma pulled out the first album with reverent care, opening it to reveal photographs that made both Miguel and Dr. Walsh draw in sharp breaths. The first page showed a woman in navy dress blues, her posture unmistakably military, her expression confident and professional. But it was the woman's face that made Miguel's world tilt on its axis. It was unmistakably Maria, but a Maria that he'd never seen before. This Maria looked like she belonged in uniform, like the crisp lines and military bearing were as natural to her as breathing. "That's from her commissioning ceremony," Emma said softly, pointing to the photograph. "She made lieutenant when I was 6. She said it was one of the proudest days of her life." Dr. Walsh leaned closer to examine the photograph. The setting was clearly official, with other uniformed officers visible in the background, and the ceremony had the formal atmosphere of a military installation. This wasn't something that could have been faked or staged. Emma turned the page to reveal more photographs. Maria in various military settings, sometimes alone, sometimes with groups of other service members whose faces had been carefully obscured or cropped out of the shots. In every picture, Maria Rodriguez looked like exactly what Emma had always claimed she was, a professional warrior serving her country. "Oh my God," Miguel whispered, sinking down onto a nearby box. "Oh my God, it's all true." Emma pulled out another album, this one containing pictures of herself with her mother at various military events and ceremonies. There was Emma as a toddler, sitting on her mother's lap while Maria wore camouflage utilities.
There was Emma at age 5, standing next to her mother outside what was clearly a military base. There was Emma at 8, beaming with pride as her mother received what appeared to be a significant military decoration. This was at the Navy ceremony I told Dr. Walsh about, the one where she got her silver star. Dr. Walsh studied the photograph closely. The setting was unmistakably official, with ranking officers and formal military protocol clearly in evidence. Maria Rodriguez stood at attention while a senior officer pinned a distinctive star-shaped medal to her uniform. Emma stood nearby, in a dress that Dr. Walsh recognized from their conversations, her face glowing with pride. Miguel was pulling documents from protective sleeves, his hands shaking as he read official letterhead and military classifications. "These are commendations," he said, his voice barely audible. "Official commendations for classified operations, for valor in combat situations, for..." He stopped reading, his face pale. Emma moved to her father's side and looked at the documents he was holding. "She never told me about most of those. She said some things had to stay private, even from family. But she wanted me to know that she was proud to serve." Dr. Walsh was examining a different set of documents, what appeared to be military orders and deployment schedules, all bearing official seals and classification markings. "Mr. Rodriguez, these deployment dates, do they correspond with the times when your wife was absent from home?" Miguel compared the dates on the documents with his own memories, his expression growing more stricken with each correlation. "Every time," he whispered. "Every business trip, every unexplained absence, every time she said she couldn't talk about work, she was deployed." Emma pulled out the final item from the box, a wooden case that she handled with extraordinary care. Inside, nestled in blue velvet, was a silver star medal exactly as she had described. The distinctive 5-pointed star gleamed in the fluorescent light of the storage facility, its presence undeniable proof of valor that could not be faked or fabricated. "She showed this to me on my 10th birthday. She said it was for something she did to save her teammates, but she couldn't tell me the details because other people's safety depended on keeping the mission secret. She said maybe someday, when I was older, I'd understand why some heroes have to stay hidden." Miguel stared at the medal in his daughter's hands, the weight of his own failures pressing down on him like a physical force. "Emma," Miguel said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I didn't understand." Emma looked at her father with an expression that was both forgiving and heartbroken. "She tried to tell you, Dad. She tried to help you understand. But you wanted her to be someone she wasn't." Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what they'd discovered. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said finally, "we need to discuss what this means for Emma's custody situation. If Commander Rodriguez is truly serving in the capacity Emma described, then her absence from the custody proceedings may not have been voluntary." Miguel nodded slowly, still staring at the evidence of his ex-wife's heroism scattered around them. "What do we do now? How do we fix this?" Emma carefully closed the metal case and held it against her chest. "We wait," she said simply. "We wait for my mom to come home, like she promised she would do. And when she does, we tell her that we finally understand who she really is." None of them had any way of knowing that Commander Maria Rodriguez was at that very moment less than 24 hours away from San Diego, and that her return would vindicate Emma's faith in ways that would shock everyone who had doubted her story. Commander Maria Rodriguez stood in the debriefing room at Naval Base Coronado, her body aching with exhaustion and her mind still processing the successful completion of Operation Silent Thunder, a classified counterterrorism mission that had taken her deep into hostile territory for the past 8 months. The mission had been vital to national security, involving the extraction of intelligence that had prevented multiple terrorist attacks on American soil. But as she signed the final classified documents and turned in her equipment, only one thought occupied her mind: getting home to Emma.
She had maintained minimal communication with stateside support throughout the deployment, receiving only the most essential updates about her personal life. She knew about the custody proceedings, had known about them since the second week of the mission, but her commanding officer had made it clear that national security took precedence over personal matters, no matter how important they might be. Rodriguez? Admiral Sarah Mitchell approached her as she finished the debriefing process. Admiral Mitchell was a legend in the special operations community, one of the few women to reach flag rank in the Navy's most exclusive circles. She had been instrumental in the classified integration of women into certain SEAL operations, and she had personally overseen Maria's training and career advancement. "Ma'am," Maria snapped to attention despite her exhaustion. "At ease, Commander." Admiral Mitchell's expression was serious, but not unsympathetic. "We need to talk about your personal situation. I understand there have been some complications while you were deployed." Maria's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am. My daughter has been placed in custody with her father due to my unavoidable absence during the proceedings. I've been briefed on the situation by our legal affairs team. It appears that the family court made their decision based on incomplete information about your service record and current deployment status." "Understandable, ma'am. My service classification means that most of my record isn't available through normal channels." "Commander, what would you say if I told you that your daughter never stopped believing in you? That she maintained, despite significant pressure from adults around her, that you were exactly who and what you are?" Maria's jaw cracked slightly. Her eyes filling with tears, she quickly blinked away. "I'd say that she's the strongest person I know, ma'am. Stronger than most of the warriors I've served alongside." Admiral Mitchell smiled. "I'd say you're right about that. Commander, I want you to know that the Navy is prepared to take some unusual steps to support you and your daughter. This custody situation represents a failure of the system to recognize and protect military families, particularly those serving in classified capacities." Maria straightened. "What kind of steps, ma'am?" "The kind that will ensure that everyone who doubted your daughter's word understands exactly how wrong they were. The kind that will make it clear that Emma Rodriguez is the daughter of a decorated combat veteran whose service to this country has been exemplary and heroic." Admiral Mitchell handed Maria a set of orders along with her file folder. "Commander, you're being temporarily reassigned to a public relations mission. Tomorrow morning, you're going to report to the San Diego Family Court in full dress uniform, accompanied by an honor guard and official representation from this command. You're going to reclaim your daughter, and you're going to do it in a way that leaves no doubt about your service or your commitment to both your country and your family." Maria read through the orders, her expression shifting from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. "Ma'am, this is highly unusual." "Yes, it is. But, Commander, your daughter faced down a courtroom full of adults who told her she was lying about her mother's service. She endured months of people trying to convince her that her hero was a fraud. That kind of loyalty and courage deserves to be publicly vindicated." Admiral Mitchell gestured toward the window overlooking the base, where Maria could see sailors and officers going about their daily duties under the California sun. "Moreover, Commander, the military has a responsibility to protect the families of service members, even when operational security prevents us from being open about that protection. We failed your daughter. Now, we're going to make it right." Maria felt a surge of emotion so powerful that it took all her training to maintain her military bearing. "Ma'am, I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by being the mother your daughter deserves and by continuing to serve your country with the same dedication you've shown throughout your career. And Commander, your daughter is going to be incredibly proud tomorrow." As Maria left the base that evening, driving through the familiar streets of San Diego toward a hotel room where she would spend her first night on American soil in 8 months, she thought about Emma's unwavering faith. Through every challenge of the mission, every moment of danger, every time she doubted whether she would make it home alive, Emma's belief in her had been a constant source of strength. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courtroom and show everyone who had doubted her daughter exactly what a Navy SEAL looked like. Tomorrow, she would prove that Emma Rodriguez had been right all along, and that sometimes the most extraordinary truths are spoken by 12-year-old girls who refuse to let adults convince them that their heroes are myths. But tonight, she simply drove through the city where her daughter was sleeping and whispered a promise to the California darkness. "I'm coming home, mija, just like I promised. I'm finally coming home."
Judge Patricia Hawthorne was reviewing her morning docket when her bailiff, Jim Martinez, appeared in her chamber's doorway with an expression she'd never seen in 15 years of working together. He looked simultaneously confused, intimidated, and slightly awestruck. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "we have a situation with the Rodriguez custody case." Judge Hawthorne looked up from her paperwork with irritation. She remembered the case, the girl with the elaborate fantasies about her Navy SEAL mother, the absent parent who had failed to appear for any proceedings. She'd scheduled this morning's hearing as a formality, a final opportunity for Maria Rodriguez to appear before the custody arrangement became permanent. "What kind of situation, Jim?" "Ma'am, there's a Navy honor guard in the hallway. Full dress uniforms, medals, the whole 9 yards. And they're here for the Rodriguez case." Judge Hawthorne set down her pen and stared at her bailiff. "A Navy honor guard here in family court?" "Yes, ma'am, and there's an Admiral with them. Admiral Mitchell, I think she said. She's requesting permission to address the court regarding Commander Maria Rodriguez." Judge Hawthorne felt the first stirring of unease in her chest. "Commander Maria Rodriguez? That appears to be the respondent's full name and rank, Your Honor. The Admiral has documentation that she'd like to present to the court." Judge Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing through the implications of what Jim was telling her. An Admiral didn't show up to family court for elaborate fantasies. Honor guards didn't escort frauds and deadbeat parents. Either Emma Rodriguez had been telling the truth all along, or this was the most elaborate hoax in the history of the American legal system. "Jim," she said finally, "how many people are we talking about?" 6 members of the honor guard, the Admiral and Commander Rodriguez herself. They're quite impressive, Your Honor." Judge Hawthorne stood up and walked to her window, which overlooked the courthouse parking lot, and what she saw there made her knees weak. A military convoy had taken up residence in the visitor parking area. Official Navy vehicles with government plates, officers in dress uniforms moving with the kind of precision that spoke to real military training, and enough flag rank insignia to suggest that this was a matter of considerable importance to the United States Navy. "Dear God," she whispered, the full magnitude of her error beginning to dawn on her. In the courthouse lobby, Emma Rodriguez sat next to her father and Dr. Walsh, her hands folded carefully in her lap and her posture as straight as a soldier's, despite her civilian clothes. She had been told that her mother was finally able to attend the hearing, but the adults around her had been vague about the details. They seemed nervous, excited, and slightly overwhelmed in a way that Emma didn't quite understand. Miguel Rodriguez was experiencing what could only be described as an existential crisis. The evidence from the storage unit had already shattered his understanding of his ex-wife and his own failures as a husband and father. Now, faced with the reality of Maria's return in official military capacity, he was grappling with the full scope of how wrong he had been about everything. "Emma," Dr. Walsh said gently, "are you ready for this?" Emma nodded, though her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. "I've been ready for 8 months," she said quietly. "I've been ready since the day she left." The courtroom doors opened and Miguel Rodriguez's world exploded.
Commander Maria Rodriguez entered first, resplendent in her navy dress blue uniform with ribbons and decorations that spoke to a level of service and valor that made McGill's breath catch in his throat. She moved with the bearing of a professional warrior, her shoulders squared and her expression disciplined, but her eyes immediately found Emma across the courtroom and softened with unmistakable love and relief. Behind her came 6 members of a naval honor guard, each one a picture of military precision and bearing. They took positions along the walls of the courtroom with movements so coordinated that they seemed choreographed, their presence transforming the family court into something approaching a state ceremony. Finally, Admiral Sarah Mitchell entered, her flag rank clearly visible on her uniform, her expression stern and official as she surveyed the courtroom that had failed so catastrophically to recognize one of her officers. Emma stood up slowly from her seat, her eyes locked on her mother's face with an expression of pure vindication and overwhelming joy. "Mom," she whispered, the word carrying 8 months of faith, hope, and unshakable conviction. Maria Rodriguez's military bearing cracked slightly when she saw her daughter for the first time since the deployment. She had dreamed of this moment through firefights and reconnaissance missions, through weeks of uncertainty and classified dangers that she could never share. Emma looked older, sadder, but her eyes held the same fierce pride that had sustained Maria through the darkest moments of her service. "Hello, mija," she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom like a promise kept. Judge Hawthorne entered from her chambers, her face pale and her expression showing the kind of shock that comes from realizing you've made a mistake of historic proportions. She looked around the courtroom, at the honor guard, at the Admiral, at the decorated commander who had been branded a fraud and deadbeat parent, and understood that she was about to face the most humbling moment of her judicial career. "All rise," the bailiff announced, though most of the military personnel were already standing at attention. Judge Hawthorne took her seat behind the bench, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her gavel. She looked down at Emma Rodriguez, the 12-year-old girl who had tried to tell her the truth, who had begged to be believed, who had maintained her faith in her mother despite a courtroom full of adults telling her she was wrong. "Miss Rodriguez," Judge Hawthorne said in her voice barely above a whisper, "it appears that you were right about your mother." Emma Rodriguez stood up straight and tall, her chin raised with the kind of dignity that her mother had taught her, and said the words that would echo in that courtroom long after the case was closed. "I know. I always knew. She promised she would come back for me, and my mom has never broken a promise in her life." The silence that followed was only broken by the sound of Miguel Rodriguez quietly weeping in the gallery, finally understanding the magnitude of what his daughter had endured, and the extraordinary woman he had been too small to recognize when she was his wife.
Admiral Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the courtroom. Judge Hawthorne, still reeling from the shock of seeing her assumptions so thoroughly demolished, gestured for the Admiral to approach the bench. "Your Honor," Admiral Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority of decades in military service, "I appear before this court today to provide testimony regarding Commander Maria Rodriguez, United States Navy, and to present evidence that I believe will be relevant to these custody proceedings." Judge Hawthorne nodded numbly, her legal training warring with her personal embarrassment as she tried to process the situation. "Admiral Mitchell, the court recognizes your authority to speak on behalf of Commander Rodriguez." Admiral Mitchell opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of official documents, each bearing the seals and classifications that spoke to their importance. "Your Honor, Commander Rodriguez has served with distinction in the United States Navy for 15 years. She is a graduate of the Naval Academy, a qualified SEAL officer, and a veteran of multiple classified operations in support of American national security interests." The Admiral's voice carried across the courtroom as she continued, each word landing like a hammer blow against the foundation of every assumption that had been made about Maria Rodriguez. During the period in question for these custody proceedings, Commander Rodriguez was deployed on Operation Silent Thunder, a classified counterterrorism mission that lasted 8 months and directly resulted in preventing multiple terrorist attacks against American civilians. Emma Rodriguez stood perfectly still, her eyes moving between her mother and the Admiral, her face glowing with vindication and pride. This was the moment she had dreamed of during months of doubt and disbelief, the moment when the truth would finally be spoken by someone with the authority to make adults listen. Furthermore, Admiral Mitchell continued, Commander Rodriguez's absence from these proceedings was not voluntary, nor was it the result of negligence or abandonment. She was under direct orders from the Department of Defense, serving in a capacity vital to national security, and was unable to return to civilian jurisdiction without compromising ongoing operations. Judge Hawthorne's face had gone completely pale. She looked down at the file in front of her, seeing her own notes and decisions with new eyes, understanding the catastrophic nature of her error. Admiral, are you telling this court that Commander Rodriguez is an active-duty Navy SEAL? That is correct, Your Honor. She currently holds the rank of Commander, has received multiple decorations for valor, including the Silver Star, and is considered one of the finest officers in her command. Her service record is exemplary, and her commitment to both her country and her family is unquestionable. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. But these were tears of triumph rather than sorrow. She had endured months of people telling her that her mother was a liar, a deadbeat, a woman who had abandoned her family for fantasy adventures. Now, in front of everyone who had doubted her, the truth was being spoken by an admiral of the United States Navy. Miguel Rodriguez sat in the gallery, his head in his hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his failures. He had left a woman who was literally risking her life to serve their country. He had abandoned a daughter who had been telling the truth about her mother's heroism. And he had spent months trying to convince that daughter that her greatest source of pride was actually a source of shame. Dr. Walsh watched the proceedings with professional fascination and personal vindication. She had been right to believe Emma, right to push for investigation rather than dismissing the girl's claims as fantasy. Emma Rodriguez had been failed by every adult in her life except her mother, and now that failure was being exposed in the most public way possible. Your Honor, Admiral Mitchell said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, I would like the court to understand something about military families, particularly those serving in special operations. These families make sacrifices that most Americans cannot imagine. They endure separations, they live with uncertainty, and they often cannot share the details of their service with the people they love most. The Admiral turned slightly to look at Emma, her expression softening with respect and admiration. Emma Rodriguez has demonstrated a level of loyalty, courage, and faith that would be remarkable in an adult, much less a 12-year-old child. She has upheld her mother's honor in the face of systematic disbelief, and she has never wavered in her conviction that Commander Rodriguez would return to fulfill her promises. Emma stood straighter, feeling the weight of the Admiral's recognition and the importance of this moment. She had been right. She had been right about everything, and now everyone knew it. Judge Hawthorne cleared her throat, her voice shaky as she addressed the court. Admiral Mitchell, what is the Navy's position regarding Commander Rodriguez's fitness as a parent and her ability to provide a stable home for her daughter? Your Honor, Commander Rodriguez is not only fit to parent her daughter, she is exemplary in that role. Emma Rodriguez has been raised by a woman who has taught her the values of service, loyalty, courage, and integrity. The evidence of that upbringing is visible in how Emma has conducted herself throughout these proceedings. Admiral Mitchell paused, allowing her words to sink in before delivering her final statement. Moreover, Your Honor, the Navy takes the welfare of military families very seriously. We are prepared to provide whatever support and documentation the court requires to ensure that Emma Rodriguez is reunited with her mother immediately. Commander Rodriguez has served her country with honor, and her country will not fail to serve her family in return.
Judge Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread before her, grappling with the reality of what she had done. She had separated a military child from her decorated war hero mother based on assumptions and prejudices rather than facts. She had branded a Navy SEAL as a deadbeat parent and allowed a 12-year-old girl to be placed in foster care because she couldn't imagine that the truth might be more extraordinary than she was prepared to accept. "Emma Rodriguez," Judge Hawthorne said finally, her voice carrying genuine remorse, "would you please approach the bench?" Emma walked forward with her mother's bearing, her back straight and her eyes clear. She had waited 8 months for this moment, and she was ready to face it with the dignity her mother had taught her. "Emma," Judge Hawthorne said gently, "I owe you an apology. I owe you an apology for not believing you, for not taking your testimony seriously, and for failing to investigate claims that deserved investigation. You have shown more integrity and courage in this courtroom than many of the adults around you, and I am deeply sorry for the injustice you have suffered." Emma looked up at the judge with eyes that held no anger, only the quiet strength of someone who had been vindicated in the most complete way possible. "Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to go home with my mom." Judge Hawthorne nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "Emma Rodriguez, by the authority vested in this court, I hereby reverse my previous ruling and award full custody of you to your mother, Commander Maria Rodriguez, United States Navy. Furthermore, I want to commend you for your unwavering faith in your mother and your courage in standing up for the truth even when no one believed you." The courtroom erupted in motion as Emma ran toward her mother, crossing the space between them in seconds and throwing herself into Maria's arms. Commander Rodriguez caught her daughter and held her tight, her military composure finally breaking as she buried her face in Emma's hair and whispered words of love and promise that only her daughter could hear. "I told you I'd come back," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I told you I'd always come back for you." "I knew," Emma whispered back. "I never stopped knowing." Miguel Rodriguez approached slowly, his face streaked with tears and his expression humble. "Maria," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology that I don't know how to give. I owe Emma an apology for not believing her. I was wrong about everything." Maria looked at her ex-husband over their daughter's head, her expression guarded but not unkind. "Miguel, we both made mistakes in our marriage, but our daughter never did. She knew who I was, and she never let anyone convince her otherwise." Dr. Walsh watched the reunion with professional satisfaction and personal joy. Emma Rodriguez had been vindicated in the most complete way possible, and her faith in her mother had been proven not just true, but heroic in its unwavering strength. As the proceedings concluded and the honor guard prepared to escort Commander Rodriguez and Emma from the courtroom, Admiral Mitchell made one final statement to Judge Hawthorne. "Your Honor, I hope this case will serve as a reminder that military families often live extraordinary lives that don't fit conventional expectations. Emma Rodriguez is the daughter of a decorated combat veteran, and she deserves to be proud of that heritage. Today, justice has been served, but more importantly, a family has been reunited." Emma walked out of the courthouse holding her mother's hand, surrounded by the honor guard that had come to witness her vindication. She had endured 8 months of adults telling her that her mother was a fraud, that her pride was misplaced, that her faith was foolish. But Emma Rodriguez had never wavered, never doubted, never stopped believing in the woman who had raised her to be strong, to be brave, and to never give up on the people she loved. Today, in front of a courtroom full of people who had failed to see the truth, Emma Rodriguez walked out into the California sunshine as the daughter of a Navy SEAL, a decorated war hero, and a woman who had kept every promise she had ever made. The girl who had been called a liar about her seal mom had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary truths come from the mouths of children who are brave enough to speak them and strong enough to defend them against a world full of adults who have forgotten how to believe in heroes. As mother and daughter drove away from the courthouse toward their new beginning, Emma smiled for the first time in 8 months, knowing that she had been right all along and that her mother's promises were as unbreakable as her mother's honor. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.